Okay, welcome to the first of four videos, some of them very short. This one won't be terribly long, over World War II. And we're going to start off with goose steps towards the war. I say goose steps instead of baby steps because that was the fancy way for Germans to go marching. Um, and so this is how World War II began. And it starts off with the rise of the dictators in Europe. You've got Mussolini in Italy in 1922, Stalin over in Russia in 1924, Hitler in Germany in 1933, and to a lesser degree, you've got Franco taking over in Spain in the 39, but he's not really one of the ones that's going to really super strongly participate in World War II, so we don't talk about him just a whole heck of a lot. One of the big things that allowed World War II to happen when the peace treaty of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, was partly designed to prevent another war just like it, is that the Allies who had imposed that treaty onto the losing powers, especially Germany, didn't enforce it after a while. And so as Germany begins to start ignoring little pieces of it, they just let it slide, and Germany keeps demanding more and more and more. And so what you get is this policy. It's known as appeasement. It's like a way of trying to deal with bullies by giving them what they want and then hoping that they don't ask for more. And as we all know, that doesn't work. And you'll see quite a few political cartoons about that. This one shows Hitler marching across the spineless leaders of democracy as he starts making demands on his way towards some sort of maybe conflict. And the first aggressive moves that the dictators are going to do actually isn't with Germany. The first thing is that Italy tries invading Ethiopia and eventually have to resort to using poisonous gas to try to take over the area, and they still only get part of it. They can't take all of it. The League of Nations votes on sanctions against the Italians for doing this, but really they can't enforce anything. They don't have any way of enforcing those sanctions, and so Italy just kind of gets away with it. At the same time, Japan invades Manchuria in 1931, sets up a puppet government there called Manchukuo under the leadership of the former emperor of all China, a fellow by the name of Pu Yi. We mentioned him earlier. Uh, Unfortunate name. And then 6 years later, they manufacture an incident and called the Marco Polo Bridge incident, and then invade the rest of China and start the Sino-Japanese War in 1937. It's actually the second Sino-Japanese War that begins in 1937. And as part of this, they start bombing civilians. They start bombing cities. Then when they capture the city of Nanking, it's so violent and so the way that they go in there and they just wreck the place. I mean, they're murdering people left, right, and center. These Japanese troops are. It's called the Rape of Nanking. Over 100,000 civilians were killed in this capture of this city after they had lost, after the Chinese troops had left. As a result, the United States is going to begin to cut off critical supplies to Japan. The thing that Japan lacks, being a small island nation, they lack oil and they lack lots of iron. And both of those things are necessary for modern industry. As Japan has industrialized very rapidly, they need these things. And it's part of why they're starting these wars anyway, is to get those natural resources, control of them, rather than having to come to us for them. And so to punish them for doing this and interfering in China, where we had a lot of business interests, the U.S. begins to cut off supplies to Japan, like metal and oil. And then Germany starts to tear down the Versailles Treaty. In 1933, Hitler refuses to pay any more of the reparations that the Treaty of Versailles had said Germany must pay. And France and England don't do anything about it. Well, they've paid for 15 years now, and I guess that's enough. We've really punished them enough, and we don't want to be bad neighbors and sore losers, sore winners, and everything. So they let him get away with it. A few years later, Hitler begins to rearm Germany and raise a large army. The Treaty of Versailles had said that they could only have 100,000 soldiers in all of Germany. He raises 1,000,000 troops. He sends troops into the demilitarized zone of the Rhineland. That's that strip along the border with France that is not supposed to have any German soldiers in it at all. French soldiers can go there to check things out, but German soldiers weren't allowed there. And he says, you know what? I'm going to put soldiers there. And the French and the English do nothing. He signs a treaty with Rome, the Rome-Berlin Axis Treaty. Rome is, Mussolini, the fascist leader down there. They decide they're going to be buddies, and they're going to stand up to anybody who fights against either one of them, which is something the Versailles Treaty says Germany's not allowed to do, is have mutual defense treaties. And France and England do nothing. In 1938, Hitler will annex Austria in a move called the Anschluss. He actually has elections in Austria. They hold elections in Austria asking, do you want to become part of Germany? And the Austrians vote yes. Now, partly that was because Nazism was fairly popular in Austria, but partly it was because the Nazis suppressed anybody else going to vote. And what did France and England do? That's right, nothing. You notice a pattern forming here? The next thing that'll happen is that Hitler will demand access to the German city of Danzig, which is on the other side of a little stretch of Poland, and he seizes it. And the French and the British do nothing. Then he demands the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia with a large German population, which is adjacent to Germany. And so Hitler he's pursuing this idea he has called Lebensraum, which means living room, and Ein Volk, ein Reich, which is one people, one empire. He was trying to. He says, look, all I'm trying to do. This is how he talks to the British and the French and everybody else, really. He says, look, all I'm trying to do is bring all the German people into one nation so they can be together. The Germans living in the Sudetenland, they're being mistreated by the Czechs who run the government of Czechoslovakia, and they're unhappy, and they've asked us to come in and save them from their persecution by the Czechs. So I want to annex it to Germany, and I promise it's the last thing that I'll ask for. And the British and the French leaders, the British leader is a man named Neville Chamberlain. He's the Prime Minister of England at the time. And they go to Munich in Germany and meet in September of 1938 with Hitler. And they sign the Munich Agreement, the Munich Pact. And they say Germany may annex the Sudetenland, but that's it. They can't have anything else. And Hitler once again says, well, no, this is the last thing I'm going to ask for. I'm not going to ask for anything else. He's said that every single time he's done something. And the British and the French said, well, okay, he says he's not going to ask for anything else, so we'll let him do this, but nothing else. And, what do they expect to happen? Well, they don't even ask the Czechs. The Czechs weren't even consulted. They had no ministers there. The British, the French, and the Germans, they just decide for the Czechs that this is what's going to happen. So now that this pact has been signed, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain goes back to England and holds up his copy of it as he gets off the plane, and he says that he had achieved peace for our time. He was so proud of what he had done, and that, I have Mr. Hitler's assurances that he's not going to make any more territorial requests, and that he's going to limit himself to these places. As soon as, by the way, the Germans march into the Sudetenland, they don't stop. They cross the border into Czechoslovakia, take the Sudetenland, and then keep going. And they basically take over all of Czechoslovakia. They do break off a piece of it called Slovakia. The Czechs and the Slovaks don't really like each other all that much. And so they break off a piece of it called Slovakia and set up a puppet government there who says, oh, thank you, Germany, for saving us from those mean Czechs. And They become a German puppet state. They do whatever Hitler tells them to. And they're just, it's sort of a ploy to say, yeah, see, I'm a good guy. I'm saving people from these mean old Czechs. So Chamberlain says, I have achieved peace for our time in September of 1938. Winston Churchill, a name you need to remember. If you've never heard it before, you need to remember it. Heck, I like this guy so much, I named my dog after him. So Winston Churchill, who was a member of Parliament, that's what MP stands for there, Winston Churchill, a member of Parliament, supposedly said in response to this that the government had a choice between war and shame. They chose shame, and they will get war. Meaning that, we've just dishonored ourselves. We had promised to protect Czechoslovakia, and we didn't. And we did it to avoid a war. And he says, there's going to be a war. And less than a year later, Churchill is going to be proven right. One year later, or almost a year later, in August of 1939, the Nazis and the Soviets will sign a non-aggression pact. The official name is the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. It's often referred to as the Molotov-von Ribbentrop Pact because the foreign ministers who signed it were Alexei Molotov of the Soviet Union and something or other von Ribbentrop of Nazi Germany. And they got together and they signed this non-aggression pact. And in this pact, Germany and the Soviets agree not to go to war for at least 10 years. We're going to be bestest buddies for the next 10 years. We promise. Now, the Nazis and the commies hate each other. Remember, Nazi propaganda says that it was communists that helped destroy Germany. And here they're making nice with the communists. Yeah. People believe this? Well, they did. Both Hitler and Stalin, who's running Soviet Union at the time, absolutely plan on stabbing the other in the back. Totally planning on it just as soon as they're ready to. But there's a secret part to this pact that not everybody knows about. They trumpet out we're peace loving, we don't want to fight wars. We promise we're not going to fight wars with each other. So they announced that really widely. But Poland, which sits in between Germany and the Soviet Union, secretly they decide, hey, you want some Poland? And they go, yeah. And so they basically decide to divide Poland up between them. And they will, just a month later. World War II will begin on September 1st, 1939. You may want to remember that. World War II will begin on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invades Poland just a week after this Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact is signed. So they wait a whole week. Well, it just so happens that Germany just coincidentally had several divisions. Divisions is tens of thousands of soldiers, anywhere from 10 to 18,000 troops, depending on what kind of division it is. So we're talking lots of soldiers. They had several divisions of troops doing practice war game exercises along the Polish border. And at the same time, on the night of August 31st, 1939, some Polish soldiers invaded Germany. Craziest thing. They came across the border. And luckily for Germany, peace-loving Germany, they had all those soldiers there to push those nasty, sneaky Poles back into Poland. And hey, while we're at it, let's just take over the country. What had happened in reality is that Hitler took some criminals, or concentration camp people, they considered them criminals, put them in Polish army uniforms, and shot them. And then took pictures of them in Germany, just across the border, saying, yep, see, they invaded us. And that was his excuse for invading Poland. And so he invades Poland, and they invade with something known as the Blitzkrieg, where they use speed and impact and tanks and truck-mounted infantry and aircraft dive bombing, and they just hit so hard and so fast that you don't know how to respond to it. It's called the Blitzkrieg. That's actually a term made up by the Allies. The Germans didn't use that term until later because it sounds good. It means lightning war, and so they hit really hard and really fast and invade Poland. And Britain and France have had enough. They promised Poland that they would protect Poland from being attacked. And so on September 2nd, they say, Germany, you have 24 hours to turn your troops around and get back out of Poland, or else we're going to declare war. Hitler doesn't believe them. Hitler thinks, well, they're going to let me get away with this too, because they've let me get away with everything else so far. And this time, they finally have grown a spine, and both Britain and France will declare war on Germany on September 3rd of 1939. But the war really starts on September 1st, 1939. Did I say that enough times? And here we have a photo. It was taken on a bridge. I believe it's the Bug River. It could be the Oder. Anyway, it's a river that's pretty much right down the middle of Poland. And it's the spot that the Germans and the Russians had agreed upon as the dividing line between where they would split up Poland. Okay. And here's a photo taken of a German officer and soldier and a Russian officer and soldier meeting in the middle of the bridge, shaking hands and saying, okay, nice to meet you. We'll be on our side, you stay on yours. And because, of course, when Germany invaded Poland, the Soviet Union, in order to protect the Poles, naturally, invaded across the other border and came to stop the German aggression. You know, we have a promise that we're not going to go to war, but so if we take over this half, they won't attack any more innocent Poles. So we're protecting the Polish people. That's what we're doing. We're not taking it over for ourselves. No, don't be silly. All right, so there's a lot of German words that you're going to hear me use over the course of this part, and so this is a little lexicon of World War II German. Reich means empire. Führer is leader. Anschluss, it means the coming together, the annexation. In this case, specifically the annexation of Austria. Lebensraum is living space, elbow room, basically. And this was Hitler's policy of taking territory from Untermensch, which is the subhumans, the non-Aryan people, the people who are not really people. We're going to take territory away from them and give it to good Germans. And we'll enslave those Untermenschen to work it for us, but it's going to be in the control and in the possession of good German settlers. We're going to have, so we have plenty of room. Untermensch is the next one. That's subhuman. They also used Übermensch, which is the Superman, the overman, and that was their term for the pure Aryan. They were Übermenschen. That were some sort of genetically destined superior race, which is all a bunch of bunk anyway. They don't even know what Aryans really were. But anyway, remember us talking about the Aryans back in India, in ancient India? That's where the Aryans are from. They're not blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Just not. Anyway, the Blitzkrieg means lightning war, like I said a moment ago. It was a term created by British writers to describe the advance of German forces, how fast and hard and violent and everything that it was. It was like lightning striking, and so they call it the Blitzkrieg. And Judenfrei, which means Jew free. This was another one of Hitler's goals. It was to remove all the Jews from Europe. That was when they talk about the Jewish question, the question is, how do we get rid of all of them? And the final solution that they'll come up with is, of course, the Holocaust. Okay, so the war is beginning. I want you to go ahead and go on to World War II-B, where we're going to talk about some of the leaders. I told you this one was going to be short, and it was. So we'll see you in a few, hopefully in just a little bit, when we talk about the leaders of the various nations during World War II.